Everyone remembers the ending of Avengers Endgame as the moment the heroes finally won. Thanos was gone. Half the universe had been brought back. Tony Stark sacrificed everything to save existence itself, and Steve Rogers finally got the peaceful life he had been denied for decades. For most fans, that's where the story ends. But what if one of the most important moments in Endgame wasn't the final battle at all? What if it happened much earlier, inside a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility in 1970? A mission that looked absolutely perfect on the surface may have quietly created a completely different future. Not another version of Kang, not another alternate Iron Man, but the one man who could become the greatest threat the Avengers have ever faced: Dr. Doom. It sounds impossible at first. After all, Tony and Steve traveled back in time for only one reason: recover the Tesseract after the New York plan failed. They completed the mission, escaped without changing anything important, or at least that's what we were led to believe. Because the MCU showed us how the mission ended, but it never showed us what happened to the people left behind after they disappeared. And once you start asking that question, one forgotten timeline suddenly becomes much darker than anyone ever imagined. The 1970 sequence is usually remembered for two emotional moments: Tony finally meeting his father, Howard Stark; Steve quietly seeing Peggy Carter again after decades apart. Marvel wanted us focused on those emotional payoffs, and understandably so. They're some of the best scenes in the entire movie. But hidden underneath those heartfelt conversations is a completely different story unfolding in the background. Think about where Tony and Steve actually were. They weren't wandering through an ordinary military base. They had infiltrated one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s most sensitive facilities, a location responsible for protecting humanity's greatest discovery at the time: the Tesseract. This wasn't just another artifact locked inside a vault. By 1970, Howard Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. were already studying it as a potential infinite energy source. Everything connected to the Tesseract would have been classified beyond top secret. Every scientist involved, every security officer, every visitor, every piece of equipment entering or leaving that building would have been monitored. Howard Stark wasn't simply working there. He was one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s founding members. His reputation, his authority, and his credibility were tied directly to the success of that project, which means if the Tesseract suddenly vanished, someone had to answer for it. Now here's the strange part. When we watch Endgame, we experience the story through the Avengers' perspective. Tony grabs the cube. Steve retrieves extra Pym particles. They escape. Mission accomplished. But history doesn't simply pause after they leave. Time keeps moving. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't magically forget that one of the most powerful objects on Earth disappeared from a heavily guarded government facility. Imagine the chaos that would have erupted only minutes after Tony activated the device and vanished. Alarms, lockdowns, security sweeps, scientists desperately trying to understand what happened. Officers questioning everyone who had access to the storage area. Entire departments placed under investigation. A project involving unlimited cosmic energy doesn't simply disappear without consequences. Someone would have been blamed immediately. And when investigators started retracing every event leading up to the theft, one name would have appeared over and over again: Howard Stark. Because Howard wasn't alone that day. Marvel actually shows us something incredibly important that most viewers never think about twice. Tony spends several minutes talking to Howard in plain sight. They walk together. They ride the elevator together. They hug each other. Multiple employees witness the interaction. One female S.H.I.E.L.D. employee even becomes visibly suspicious after seeing Tony inside the building. The movie intentionally draws attention to her reaction. Security personnel are later shown searching for intruders. That's a detail most fans treat as background tension for the heroes, but from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s perspective, it becomes evidence. Once investigators review security footage, that mysterious man keeps appearing beside Howard Stark. They don't know it's Tony from the future. They don't know time travel exists. All they know is that an unidentified individual somehow gained access to one of the world's most secure facilities, spent time with Howard Stark, and shortly afterward, the Tesseract disappeared. Suddenly, the coincidence becomes impossible to ignore. Picture the investigation from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s point of view instead of the Avengers. They review surveillance footage frame by frame. The unknown man is seen speaking privately with Howard. Witnesses confirm they appeared unusually close. The suspicious employee identifies the same man she encountered near the elevator. Security teams report they failed to capture him. Moments later, the Tesseract is gone. Without understanding time travel, what conclusion would anyone naturally reach? The obvious answer would be that Howard Stark helped orchestrate the theft, maybe intentionally, maybe under pressure, but either way, the evidence points toward him. And history has already shown us something important about governments inside the MCU. They're willing to turn against even their greatest heroes when they believe national security is at risk. Civil War proved that loyalty means very little once political pressure enters the equation. Steve Rogers himself became America's most wanted fugitive despite spending his life protecting the world. If Captain America could be hunted, why would Howard Stark receive special treatment after losing the single most valuable object on Earth? This is where our theory begins taking a dramatic turn, because Marvel never tells us what happened inside that branch timeline after Tony and Steve escaped. The Avengers assumed Steve would eventually return every Infinity Stone and repair history. But what if the damage had already begun long before he arrived? Bruce Banner explained that traveling into the past creates branching realities. Every major change can create a new timeline. Even if Steve later returned the Tesseract, he couldn't erase every investigation, every accusation, every decision made while the cube was missing. Once S.H.I.E.L.D. believed Howard Stark betrayed them, events would have continued naturally inside that branch reality. Suspicion would have spread. Careers would have been destroyed. Trust would have collapsed. Howard's entire life could have unraveled before anyone ever realized the truth. Returning the Tesseract later wouldn't automatically erase the fact that, for a critical period of time, it disappeared under Howard's watch. Now imagine Howard trying to defend himself. How do you explain that the man everyone saw beside you was actually your unborn son from 50 years in the future? How do you convince military officials that someone traveled through time using technology that doesn't even exist yet? Every explanation sounds more insane than the last. The more Howard insists he's innocent, the guiltier he appears. Eventually, S.H.I.E.L.D. stops listening. Government agencies begin treating him not as one of their founders, but as a security risk. Every laboratory access is revoked. Every research project suspended. Every ally starts questioning whether Howard secretly sold humanity's greatest discovery to a foreign power. Overnight, one of the most respected scientists in America becomes the center of its biggest intelligence scandal. At that point, Howard has only one choice left: disappear before the people he helped build S.H.I.E.L.D. with become the people hunting him. And Howard wouldn't be running alone. During Tony's conversation with his father, we learned something incredibly important. Maria Stark is pregnant. Tony hasn't been born yet. That single line becomes the emotional heart of this entire theory. Because if Howard is forced into hiding immediately afterward, Maria goes with him. They abandon everything: their mansion, their wealth, their influence, their technology, their future. None of it matters anymore. Survival becomes the only priority. Eventually, after weeks or perhaps months of constantly looking over their shoulders, one forgotten nation offers them something America no longer can: anonymity. A small Eastern European country called Latveria, a place that, within Marvel Comics, is destined to become forever connected with one name: Victor Von Doom. Think about how completely different Howard's life would become there. This isn't the billionaire inventor building revolutionary technology inside luxurious laboratories. This is a broken man stripped of his identity, living under a false name, afraid that every knock on the door might be the people who finally found him. The brilliant engineer who dreamed of changing the future is now simply trying to survive another day without being recognized. Maria, once surrounded by privilege, is preparing to give birth while hiding in a country that barely knows who they are. And eventually, instead of welcoming the child who was supposed to inherit the Stark legacy, they welcome a son into a life of fear, poverty, and exile. In this reality, perhaps they never call him Anthony. Perhaps Howard cannot even bear to use the future he believes was stolen from him. Instead, the boy receives another name, a name history will one day fear: Victor. At first, Victor grows up knowing nothing about the world his parents lost. To him, this difficult life is simply normal. He has never seen the Stark mansion. He's never witnessed Howard's genius transforming industries. He's never experienced the comfort, opportunity, or admiration that should have surrounded his family. Instead, he watches his father work endlessly just to provide the basics. He sees exhaustion replacing confidence, regret replacing ambition. And every now and then, Howard catches himself staring silently at his own son. Not because he loves him any less, but because every passing year reveals something increasingly impossible to ignore. Victor's face begins resembling someone Howard can never forget. The mysterious man from 1970. The stranger whose arrival marked the exact moment everything collapsed. The same eyes, the same expressions, the same unmistakable features. Howard doesn't understand how it's possible. But every time he looks at Victor, he sees the ghost of the man who unknowingly destroyed his life. Howard tries to bury those thoughts for years. Maybe he's convincing himself that it's just coincidence. Maybe grief has distorted his memory, but the older Victor becomes, the harder it is to ignore. The resemblance isn't simply familiar anymore. It becomes unsettling. Every smile, every look of determination, every expression reminds Howard of that day inside the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility. Imagine carrying that burden for decades, loving your son more than anything in the world while simultaneously being reminded every single day of the stranger who unknowingly took everything away from you. Howard would never blame Victor. He knows his son is innocent. But he also knows that somewhere in time, somehow, the answers are connected. And eventually, after years of running, hiding, and surviving, Howard reaches the point where keeping the truth secret no longer protects anyone. If anything happens to him, Victor deserves to know why their family spent an entire lifetime living in the shadows. So one day, Howard finally tells him everything, not as a scientist presenting evidence, not as the legendary founder of Stark Industries, but simply as a father who has spent decades carrying a story no one else would ever believe. He tells Victor about America, about S.H.I.E.L.D., about the incredible life they once had, about working alongside some of the greatest minds on Earth, about a mysterious energy source called the Tesseract that promised to change humanity forever. Then, he tells him about one ordinary day in 1970. The day a man appeared out of nowhere, a man who looked exactly like Victor does now. Howard explains how they spoke, how they shared a strangely personal conversation, how that man seemed to know things he shouldn't possibly know. Minutes later, the Tesseract disappeared, and from that moment onward, everything fell apart. S.H.I.E.L.D. turned against him. His own government branded him a traitor. Friends became investigators. Allies became enemies. The empire he spent his life building vanished almost overnight. Howard doesn't claim to understand who that man was, but he knows that if their paths had never crossed, Victor would have inherited an entirely different future. Those words stay with Victor long after the conversation ends. At first, they sound almost impossible to believe. Time travel, a stranger with his own face, a stolen cosmic artifact. It feels more like a fairy tale than history. But Howard isn't a man known for fantasy. Everything Victor has ever learned about his father tells him one thing. Howard Stark was brilliant, rational, and painfully honest. If he says this happened, then somehow it happened. And before long, Howard passes away. Not surrounded by wealth or recognition, not remembered as one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s greatest founders. He dies as an anonymous exile in a country that never truly knew who he was. Shortly afterward, Maria dies as well, leaving Victor completely alone. In the span of only a few years, he loses both parents. But he inherits something far more dangerous than money or technology. He inherits a question. Who was that man from 1970? And why did one meeting destroy his family's entire existence? Most heroes would search for the truth, hoping to clear their parents' names. Victor doesn't. The world has already taught him that fairness doesn't exist. He grew up watching suffering become normal. Poverty became routine. Loss became familiar. Compassion doesn't shape his worldview. Resentment does. If someone stole his future before he was even born, then finding that person isn't about justice, it's about repayment. Victor begins investigating every detail his father remembered. He tracks down forgotten records. He follows decades-old rumors. He searches for former S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were involved in the investigation. Some refuse to speak. Others simply disappear, because Victor isn't asking politely anymore. Every unanswered question fuels his anger even further. The closer he gets to the truth, the more dangerous he becomes. Intelligence officers vanish. Hidden archives are broken into. Confidential files begin disappearing across multiple countries. People assume they're witnessing the rise of another criminal mastermind. In reality, they're watching a grieving son willing to cross every moral line to understand why his family was condemned before he was even born. Years turn into decades. During that time, Victor transforms himself completely. He realizes that information alone won't be enough. If the people responsible truly possess technology capable of traveling through time, then ordinary intelligence agencies will never catch up to them. He needs resources unlike anything the world has ever seen, so he builds them slowly, methodically, and without mercy. He manipulates governments from the shadows. He takes control of powerful industries. He weaponizes scientific discoveries. Every success gives him more influence, and every failure teaches him another lesson. Eventually, Latveria itself changes. What was once simply the place where his parents hid becomes the kingdom Victor reshapes with his own hands. Some citizens see him as the man who restored their nation's strength. Others fear him as a ruler who demands absolute obedience. Both can be true at the same time. Because Victor no longer believes power is something to admire. To him, power is survival. The world only respects those capable of forcing history to obey them. And unlike many villains in the MCU, Victor never limits himself to one path. This is where he becomes fundamentally different from Tony Stark. Tony believed science could solve almost every problem. Victor reaches the opposite conclusion. Science alone failed his father. Intelligence alone couldn't protect his family. Technology alone couldn't rewrite destiny. So Victor begins exploring something Tony never truly embraced: magic. Not because he rejects science, but because he realizes the universe itself doesn't separate the two. Cosmic energy, ancient sorcery, dimensional forces. The deeper he studies reality, the more obvious it becomes that every great power in the Marvel Universe exists where science and magic overlap. Instead of choosing one discipline over the other, Victor dedicates his life to mastering both. His laboratories become temples of impossible research. Ancient mystical knowledge sits beside cutting-edge engineering. Every discovery strengthens the next. Little by little, he begins creating something unprecedented. A suit designed not merely as armor, but as the perfect fusion of human intelligence and supernatural power. That idea alone changes how we look at the official Avengers Doomsday trailer. One of the most shocking moments is Doom stopping Thor's Stormbreaker with only 2 fingers. At first glance, it feels almost unbelievable. Stormbreaker isn't an ordinary weapon. It's one of the most powerful objects ever forged, capable of channeling the full might of Thor himself. We've seen gods struggle against its force. We've seen armies fear it. Yet Doom treats it like nothing. If his armor is built only on advanced technology, that scene becomes difficult to explain. If it's powered only by magic, it still feels incomplete. But a perfect combination of both? Suddenly, the moment starts making sense. Doom isn't overpowering Thor through raw strength alone. He's using decades of scientific innovation enhanced by mystical forces that operate beyond conventional physics. He's solving problems the same way Howard Stark once taught his son to think, except Victor has removed every ethical limit from the equation. In his mind, the universe is simply another equation waiting to be conquered. His obsession with perfection comes at an enormous cost. Every experiment pushes further than the last. Some enhance his abilities, others nearly kill him. One catastrophic test changes him forever. An uncontrolled surge of energy tears through his own equipment, leaving his face horribly burned. It's a defining moment, not just physically, but psychologically. The man staring back in the mirror no longer resembles the future Howard imagined for his family. The scars become a permanent reminder of the path he chose. But beneath those burns, something else remains unmistakably visible: the face of Tony Stark. Not exactly the same, but close enough that anyone familiar with Howard's bloodline could recognize the connection. Suddenly, another mystery surrounding Avengers Doomsday begins fitting into place. Why would Marvel intentionally cast Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom? Why would Doom's appearance evoke Tony Stark at all? Under this theory, the answer becomes chilling because they aren't unrelated people. They share the same origin, divided by a single mistake made during one mission in 1970. The deeper Victor digs into the past, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. At first, he believes the man from 1970 was simply a thief. Then, he discovers classified S.H.I.E.L.D. reports describing impossible inconsistencies surrounding that day. Witness statements don't match normal human behavior. Security logs contain unexplained gaps. Personnel records mention an unidentified man who appeared inside one of the most secure facilities in America without any official authorization, then seemingly vanished without leaving a trace. Decades later, most of those files have either been sealed, destroyed, or quietly forgotten. But Victor isn't an ordinary investigator anymore. By now, he commands an entire nation. Governments fear him. Intelligence agencies monitor him. And yet none of them truly understand what he's searching for. Piece by piece, Victor reconstructs an event that history itself tried to bury. Then, hidden inside old S.H.I.E.L.D. archives, he finds the one thing his father never had the chance to see: a grainy surveillance recording. The quality is terrible. Faces are barely visible. But as Victor watches the footage, time seems to stop. There, standing beside Howard Stark, is a man with his exact face. For the first time in his life, Howard's story is no longer just a memory passed down from a grieving father. It becomes undeniable evidence. Victor isn't imagining the resemblance. It exists. Somewhere in history, another version of himself walked through that facility decades before he was born. Every emotion he's carried since childhood suddenly explodes into a single realization. His family's suffering wasn't random. Someone caused it. Someone with his own face. And from that moment onward, his mission changes completely. He's no longer investigating the past simply to understand it. He's preparing to rewrite it. Because if one impossible event destroyed his future, then another impossible event can restore it. The only question is how. Victor begins studying every anomaly connected to the Avengers, alien invasions, Infinity Stones, quantum physics, the blip, the Battle of New York, the destruction of Sokovia. Every major event reveals one uncomfortable truth. The Avengers have been bending reality for years. To the public, they're Earth's mightiest heroes. To Victor, they're reckless individuals who repeatedly interfere with forces no human should ever control. They didn't just save the universe, they rewrote history itself. They traveled through time. They altered timelines. They left behind branches of reality where innocent lives could be completely different. And according to Victor, his own existence is living proof of those consequences. That changes everything. Because in his mind, the Avengers are no longer heroes who accidentally made a mistake. They're people who broke the rules of reality, then walked away without ever looking back to see who suffered because of it. Naturally, Victor's investigation eventually leads him to one name above all others: Tony Stark. The more he uncovers, the clearer the connection becomes. Tony was present during the 1970 mission. Tony designed the time travel system. Tony stole the Tesseract. Tony escaped before history could correct itself. Every road leads back to the same person. But when Victor reaches the present day, he discovers something almost infuriating. Tony Stark is already dead. The man Victor spent decades preparing to confront sacrificed himself, defeating Thanos. There will never be a trial. There will never be revenge. There will never even be a conversation. The person Victor blames most is gone forever. To many people, that would end the story. To Victor, it only redirects it. Because Tony wasn't alone in 1970. There was another man standing beside him that day. Another Avenger who escaped the consequences. Another hero who survived: Steve Rogers. From Victor's perspective, Steve isn't the noble Captain America remembered by history. He's Tony's accomplice. He helped steal the Tesseract. He infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. He escaped the timeline. And unlike Tony, Steve is still somewhere out there. Maybe old, maybe retired, maybe living the peaceful life he finally earned at the end of Endgame. But peaceful for whom? Certainly not for Howard Stark, certainly not for Maria, certainly not for Victor. While Steve danced with Peggy Carter, another version of history watched Howard lose everything. That's the kind of irony that would fuel a villain like Doctor Doom. He doesn't hate Steve because Steve is Captain America. He hates him because Steve got his happy ending while Victor's family spent generations paying the price. And that's where this theory begins connecting naturally with Avengers Doomsday. If Victor has already mastered advanced technology, combined it with powerful magic, and uncovered the truth about branching timelines, then he doesn't have to limit himself to one universe anymore. He understands that reality itself has become unstable. The barriers separating different timelines are beginning to crack. Incursions are becoming inevitable. Entire universes are colliding. While everyone else sees a multiversal disaster unfolding, Doom sees opportunity. Every broken boundary between realities is another doorway leading closer to the people responsible for his existence. He doesn't need to guess where the Avengers are. He can search across countless timelines until he finds them. He can study worlds where different choices were made. Worlds where Tony survived. Worlds where Steve never returned the stones. Worlds where Howard remained America's greatest inventor. Every universe becomes another piece of evidence proving one thing: history is broken. And if history is broken, then someone powerful enough has to rebuild it. That's the philosophy that transforms Victor from a brilliant ruler into Doctor Doom. He's no longer fighting simply for revenge. Revenge is only the beginning. After witnessing endless fractured realities, Victor reaches a terrifying conclusion. As long as the multiverse exists in its current form, suffering like his family's will continue forever. Infinite timelines mean infinite tragedies, infinite accidents, infinite innocent people whose lives are destroyed because someone else altered reality. So Doom convinces himself that freedom is the real problem. Too many universes, too many possibilities, too many heroes making impossible decisions. In his mind, the solution isn't to protect the multiverse. It's to control it, to reshape every fractured reality into a single world governed by one ruler, himself. That's exactly why the idea of Battleworld fits so perfectly into this theory. Instead of allowing broken universes to collide randomly, Doom could deliberately gather the surviving pieces together and forge an entirely new reality under his rule. A world where history follows only one path, one timeline, one authority. No more branches, no more paradoxes, no more accidental victims like Howard Stark. On the surface, it sounds almost noble, but underneath that promise lies the heart of every great dictator. The belief that only they deserve the power to decide everyone else's future. That's what makes Doctor Doom so fascinating. He doesn't see himself as evil. He genuinely believes he's fixing a mistake the Avengers created decades ago. And if Marvel truly chooses to reveal Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom with an origin anywhere close to this concept, it would completely change the way we look at Avengers Endgame. That emotional 1970 sequence would no longer be remembered only as Tony meeting his father or Steve seeing Peggy one last time. It would also become the moment the MCU unknowingly planted the seed for its greatest villain. A mission celebrated as one of the Avengers' finest victories would secretly become the birth of their ultimate enemy. Every smile in those scenes would carry hidden tragedy. Every emotional reunion would have consequences nobody realized until years later. Of course, this is only a theory, not confirmed MCU canon. But sometimes the most unforgettable Marvel theories are the ones that take existing pieces of the story and connect them in ways we've never considered before. And if there's one thing the multiverse saga has taught us, It's that even the smallest decision can echo across countless realities. Maybe the heroes really did save the universe in Endgame, but maybe, somewhere in one forgotten branch of time, they also created the one man powerful enough to make them wish they never traveled back to 1970 in the first place. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video, share it with fellow Marvel fans, and subscribe to MovieCast for more cinematic MCU theories. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, a $25 super thanks goes a long way in helping us create more videos like this. Until next time.